percent of our agenda.
Okay.
Hit me up, welcome.
Well, I think there is some.
Godspeed.
Thank you.
I think. These are long. And after the, so create help. After.
And yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good to see so many people in person again. And hello to all who are online on the videos. So we're going to get started. This is the 6th meeting of the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. We're in the home stretch now. We're getting there. We're almost there. So we're going to start today finalizing those recommendations that this task force wants to send forward to the governor and General Assembly. So we're going to talk about and discuss the feedback you submitted following the last task force meeting that we had. And we're going to decide if there are any other or any more edits that we want to make to the draft recommendations. So our next meeting is scheduled for November 9th. It's our last opportunity to adjust the draft recommendations before we put them forward in the draft report. And then the task force is scheduled to meet one last time, November 28th, and we're going to vote on the final report at that time. So if we can just stick to that timeline, then we're just really going to barely meet the requirement to actually submit that report by December 1st. So this is really, really tight. And it's right, isn't that the same week as Thanksgiving? Or no?
It's the week after.
It's the week after. So you should be full and ready to talk. Burn more calories anyway from Thanksgiving, the week after, if we can really crunch hard. So how does that sound to everyone in terms of this tight timeline? We're going to need you to commit to meeting and working hard so we can get to where we need to get. Any feedback, questions on that? No? All right, well then I'm going to turn it over to Director Penske.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Look, as was said, we're getting to the closing rounds of this. Make some decisions, and the battle of ideas, or what I call ideological struggle, is healthy. So, if there are differences, it's okay to surface them at the end of the discussion debate. If your mind's not changed, then we just vote them up, vote them down. And we are getting close to that time today. Obviously, we have some recommendations before us. people should not hesitate to offer their opinion, the pros and cons, and then try to convince other colleagues of the task force, and then we'll vote on it and move to the next one. So the agenda. So with that, I will pass it on to Mark Stewart.
All right, thank you. Where we're going to start today is actually an agenda item from last time that we didn't get to fully, which is circling back to a conversation that really started 2 meetings ago, and we didn't quite have time for it, which is, we're talking about a lot of recommendations that have some significant costs, and we need to think about the different opportunities that the state has to generate new revenue to help fund some of these initiatives, which actually dovetails really nicely with the conversation that's happening at the Maryland Commission on Climate Change around the same topics. So what I wanted to do, and we just ran out of time for this last time, was bring you all up to speed on some of the conversations that have happened at the Climate Commission, really just to open the door to hear any thoughts that you have about measures the state should consider to generate revenue to help fund decarbonization projects, especially in the building sector. So if you give me just this up on the screen so that everyone can see. Okay, so just a couple of slides here. First, some context. So what level of funding might be needed to address climate change? There have been a number of studies on this over the years. Those studies tend to indicate that climate change could reduce the cost of climate change, if you will, could reduce U.S. GDP, gross domestic product, by up to 10% by the end of this century. So we know already, and presumably a lot of the reason that many of you decided that you wanted to participate in this task force is that we're well aware that the cost of climate change is mounting, and that it has some significant and very real economic consequences. Studies show that in terms of the investment needed to hit the Paris Climate Agreement goals, that around 3% of global GDP is the investment needed to reduce emissions and sequester carbon to achieve the Paris Agreement. Downscaling that 3% to Maryland's GDP is about $500 billion per year, so 3% investment would be about $15 billion a year. Now you might very logically ask, great, what are we currently investing? And that is a surprisingly tricky number to pin down, because of course we're talking about investments from across the board. We're not just talking about public sector, we're talking primarily, frankly, about public sector investment. And likely there's already billions of dollars in investments happening today, and you're well aware of many of them. If you're purchasing electric vehicles, you're making investments in buildings to decrease energy consumption, decrease emissions. All of those are examples of the sort of investments that are happening every day, on top of the robust investments that the state is making to address all of these issues. When we conducted the Climate Pathway Report with the University of Maryland, they found that the level of investment that's needed for Maryland to achieve its 2031 emissions reduction goal will create at least a $2 billion net economic benefit to the state. So what we see is that the total benefit is greater than the total cost to the state, and create about 17,000 additional jobs by 2031. But that still doesn't quite answer the question, well, how much should the state be preparing to put its own, kind of money behind this? So we looked to some other states. What are several other climate leading states investing in state dollars? We see that New York has a $4.2 billion budget package, and for their FY23 budget, which is about $225 per capita. So, we boiled everything down into per capita spend to look at this in terms of apples to apples across the states. The equivalent spend for Maryland compared to that New York example would be about $1.4 billion in state expense. Minnesota had a $2 billion climate budget for FY24, so that's a little bit more actually than New York at $350 per capita. And California is spending significantly more, more than $1,200 per capita. And of course, they have a very large economy-wide cap and invest program that's providing a lot of revenue to the state to be able to put that much money toward investments. The Maryland equivalent of the California spend would be about $7.6 billion invested in public funds into Maryland's economy annually. So when the Climate Commission looked at those sort of numbers and thought about the different things that they saw in the Pathway Report and just other ideas that the commission members were bringing forward, some of the ideas that came up were among these. Expand Maryland's existing cap and invest program, which is, some of you know, we're participating in a program that we call RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, where we currently regulate power plants, and see that those power plants are purchasing carbon allowances. Those allowances, the sales of those allowances, the revenues from the sales of the allowances goes into our Strategic Energy Investment Fund, or SEIF. It's about $100 million a year in annual revenue that the state is then able to use for a number of wonderful clean energy projects, mostly administered by Director Pinsky's agency. So one thing that the Climate Commission has discussed, and if any of you read the Climate Pathway Report, it showed that a cap and invest program may be a very critical policy for the state to consider in achievement of its 2031 and 2045 policy goals. We also heard about creating a carbon fee and dividend program. This is, you could think of as being similar to cap and invest, except where cap and invest takes a market-based approach to set the carbon price. A carbon fee and dividend program is typically a program where the government is setting the carbon price. So you have kind of a guaranteed carbon price that covered entities are paying. And then the dividend piece is a recognition. And this also exists in cap and invest, where a portion of the revenues is given back directly as refund checks to low-income families. Make sure that if there's any energy cost increase experienced by consumers in Maryland, that especially low-income families are protected from any increased energy cost burden. We also heard about increased registration fees on fuel-burning vehicles and using the resulting revenues to fund the state's EV incentives. Collecting a fee on fossil fuels in Maryland, including those used in-state and those that are destined for export. Using the projected net economic benefits of climate action in Maryland as a funding source. Seeking congressionally directed funding, aka earmarks, for priority climate projects. And then we also heard about following the lead of California that has been really out there on their legal strategy for suing fossil fuel companies for misleading and harmful claims detrimenting to public health and well-being. So those are some of the ideas that were floated at the Climate Commission. And we really just wanted to create a little bit of space before we dive deep again into our discussion draft recommendations for the task force to broaden the conversation, to allow any additional thoughts on sort of funding strategies that the state should consider, revenue sources, if you will, to fund some of these very important priorities that we've been talking about here at the task force.
Okay.
I just had a question. You said expand RGGI, and I apologize if I missed it. What specifically is the idea behind expanding RGGI? What are you essentially going to expand?
Well, what the University of Maryland modeled in that case was including other sources of fossil fuel emissions under the RGGI program. So I think what they included were emission or the fossil fuel companies that are supplying oil, heating oil, propane, natural gas, and motor fuels to the state. I think that's what was modeled as they were looking at different options for having the fossil fuel importers, contribute to Maryland's cap and invest program.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What sort of comments are we looking for?
Well, I
Constructive
think,
ones.
yeah, just to set up the conversation again. we need funding. The state of Maryland doesn't have enough, money, available to fund the billions of dollars that we need to support the recommendations that are in here and also support the recommendations that are in the other, commission, the MCC as well. So I think it's important that we talk about or think about recommending ways to fund it, because otherwise it's just a report that's given, pushed up forward, and there's no way of funding all the things that we're talking about. I think it's just important that we think about some ways to do that. So these are just some options, ideas that have come up.
So I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I did submit a couple of recommendations. I'm not sure how far they went, but there seems to be we're never going to get there with tax dollars and utility incentives. It's not enough of it, right?
Right.
I mean, they're good tools. It's nice incentive, but it's just an incentive. And we haven't really talked much about like market-based incentives. For instance, if I'm a homeowner and I want to spend money, I have some money and I want to spend it on my house, am I going to put in a marble countertop? Am I going to insulate the house or put in a heat pump? And if you put in a marble countertop, you can search on the MLS. That's proven that increases the value of your house. There's something called like a home energy score, which we don't do in Maryland, which could be on the MLS. So if someone is looking for a home, they can search by, I only want to buy homes that have a home energy score above 7, right? And if it's a 2, we're going to negotiate with the homeowner to make their house more efficient. And at that transaction, homes in the United States every 7 years are sold on average, right? People only stay in their houses, for about 7 years at a time. This is a problem with having 2 phones. So we haven't really, and that's just one that I'm just touching on now, but there hasn't been much of a discussion on trying to find market-based solutions instead of relying solely on tax dollars.
Okay, so if I can just start again with another comment. So just on a couple of these. So on the first one, on Cap and Invest, we already have that program. It's bringing in $150 million, at least the last 2 years is how much we've gotten into the state. That's not tax money, thank goodness, right? It's not utility money. So it's money.
We don't call it a tax, but it does, I think, increase people's utility bills by some. If I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, not that I don't think it's a valuable program, but
The net
someone's
effect,
paying for it.
yeah, the net effect of Reggie has been to reduce utility bills.
Right.
Has it?
Yeah. And so a lot of people don't know that. So it's actually working. It's bringing in $150 million. Like I said, that's a lot, but we can bring in so much more. The Cap and Invest expands it from just the power plant, not just the power plants, but the oil and gas companies as well, which you've already gave a detail, what that means. So that's just an example of how we could bring in, if we have the prices set at the same price as Reggie, which is $15 metric ton, I think, per metric ton. Yes, $15. So even if we stayed there and then we added in the oil and gas, then we're talking about 625 million. So that's more money to pay for the things that you all are asking us to do as a state. So, and if you made that amount even higher, you could be up to $1 billion or $2 billion. So it's just an idea. It's just something that we've heard was in the pathway report. The commission is thinking of ways like that as well. So that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to just point out is the last one, number 7. I just wanted to make it kind of clear that California just joined that one just a month ago. I don't even know New York, US climate. I think that was in June.
Oh, in
or
September.
September.
Yep.
So just last month. So they just decided to be a part of that. Before that, it was just a couple of smaller states. That one, just my opinion, that would take 10 years to bring money into the state of Maryland. We don't have 10 years to find ways to fund all the things that we need to do to get to a green economy with more rebates and incentives and pushing the market to move that one will require some money up front from Maryland, meaning lawyers and all of that. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear on that's not money that's going to come in the time frame I think that we needed in order to meet the goals by 2031. Paul?
Yeah, no, thank you. And look, if we want to address this problem, we have to raise money, as the secretary said. And we have to use whatever tools at our hand. The one question I have, Mark, look, and I think David's right. A lot of these companies will push down their costs to the consumers. So in some ways, it is an indirect tax. Given that some of these private sector companies are making profit from the industry they're involved in, personally, I think they should have skin in the game. That they shouldn't be able to simply push all of the cost to them down the consumers. So, and I'm not sure what the mechanism is to ensure that the companies who pay the initial cost bear some of the burden. Personally, I would think it should be a disproportionate portion of the burden, but at least some of the burden. I just think as a state, just as we have a progressive income tax, and this is not a tax for the record, but that I think we owe it to come up with some kind of creative mechanism that they have skin in the game and they can't just push it on to taxpayers or ratepayers, and that if it eats up 0.25% or 0.5% of their profit margin, it is what it is. But they are being successful because of the product they're selling. And I think that it falls on the consumers, just reinforces the inequality. And I think if we can be a little more nuanced with a cap and invest, where we also put our philosophy behind it as well. And also, I think it's saying to the taxpayers, the consumers, we understand your burden, the pressure on you, and we're not going to let you have to carry this alone.
That's right. Okay, any questions, comments, about funding, ideas, opportunities? Yes.
Hi, so Greg Ackerman from the Building Trades. So I'll just say a couple things. First of all, I know this work group has talked a lot about the IRA incentives, but another piece that stands out is the opportunity for discretionary federal grants to address some of these problems. And I know obviously the state through the different modes has put in some competitive applications, but my knowledge, they haven't been overly successful. So I think first of all, kind of doing a look back at how the existing funding cycles have gone. I mean, I can tell you just off the top of my head, there was $100 million that went to a Virginia electric bus facility, and Maryland had a very, very similar application. And my opinion is that I think, honestly speaking, I think the state has not met a lot of the equity criteria that the Biden administration has set out in the competitive grant, guidance. So looking at ways to attract discretionary federal money to address a lot of these concerns, the things that stand out are obviously electric bus facilities and EV charging. Several counties I think are kind of going out to their own applications, and I would imagine the state's probably looking at tapping into certain discretionary funding. And so the guidance from I think the White House has been pretty clear. And obviously speaking from labor's perspective, labor is an important component to address. And I think the state could probably do well to both address some of the labor and workforce issues in those grants, and that would presumably, result in more successful applications. And there's obviously a strict time clock on that too. Funding seems to run out, pretty shortly within the next couple of cycles. So that stands to mind.
Are you saying that Maryland applied for grants and didn't get them because we didn't meet the criteria?
Yeah. I mean, that's my opinion. I say there's like the state gets feedback as to, and they get technical assistance on certain grants, but so I don't want to speak out of turn, but if you look at, for example, the very, very similar project that that Virginia applied for, not the state, obviously, because they have a Republican governor, but there was a, WMATA applied for a project in Virginia. They had a labor agreement and other kind of equity components that were tied to that project. And the Baltimore, the relevant MDOT Baltimore project didn't have those same equity criteria. So, I think the White House and other federal agencies have put out a lot of resources as to, to help states seemingly address some of the gaps in their applications, and the labor piece stands out to us.
Okay.
And then that was the other thing, just to Director Pinsky's point, I just, in looking at the draft priority recommendations, we talk a lot about trying to find ways to hold utilities and the companies accountable. But there are also several kind of incentives tax incentives that are mentioned here. And so, one of the things that stands out to me, just in the initial workforce development section, and we were talking about providing a lot of potential tax incentives to contractors and kind of to potential flow down utilities to take advantage of programs that could subsidize wages. Whether that's the best use of the state's money when there are kind of some other funding challenges, I would probably make the argument that it's not. And you could also look at potentially tying some of the other tax incentives that you want to provide to, for example, utilities. I mean, I would imagine that any kind of mini IRA tax incentive would also apply to utilities if the state was going to consider something. So tying kind of some of the other, consumer protection provisions into those tax incentives could be a way to potentially address some of the concerns.
And we do have 60 minutes on the agenda to discuss the priority recommendations.
Sorry, I don't mean to monologue.
No, it's helpful. Two quick programming notes. We got a request if anyone at the table can introduce themselves before making comments. It helps the people online. And actually, if you wouldn't mind, could you just reintroduce yourself, just to make sure that people heard that online?
Yeah, Greg Ackerman from the Building Trades Unions.
Great, thank you.
Task force member, by the way.
And then we've got two hands up. So we'll go to Dunn Scott and then Mark Sibitz. Dunn, are you still interested in making a comment?
Then we can't hear you.
We see that you unmuted, but we can't hear you. It might be just a mic issue on your end. We'll come back to you if you're able to get it working. Mark?
Thanks, Mark. Mark Shubis from OPC, Office of People's Counsel. That slide on the revenue raising options was very interesting. Mark, first I had a question and a comment. The question is, with respect to Minnesota, New York, and California, I think those comparisons are very instructive. I wonder if for the next meeting or some future meeting, we could get a breakdown of how those states are raising that revenue. I think that could potentially be helpful for us in thinking through what our means are. And you identified some of the means, like California's economy-wide cap and invest program is one means, but Minnesota, for instance, I think doesn't have that kind of program. So I think it could be interesting to see, just for the states that are making significant investments, especially of public money into climate, exactly how they're doing it. The comment I wanted to make is just sort of, I think Director Pinsky mentioned the need for, and others, for progressive ways of raising revenue. And that, from OPC's perspective, is very important. I think it goes without saying that we have a pretty serious inequality in both wealth and income in the United States right now. And I think in thinking through how we raise money for these important programs, we've got to make sure that we're recognizing that and therefore raising money progressively rather than regressively. And from OPC's perspective, we deal with residential utility. We represent the interests of residential utility ratepayers in proceedings at the Public Service Commission. And so, to the extent that we are funding programs through utility rates as opposed to progressive income or wealth taxes, for instance, that is a regressive way of funding programs. which is not to say there's not a place for it in some contexts, but every residential ratepayer, regardless of wealth, regardless of income, pays the same customer fixed charge, pays the same kilowatt per hour rate for electricity. So, to the extent we're funding things through that kind of mechanism rather than through more progressive means, we are raising the money in a regressive and equitable way. So just to sort of make a plug for the need to recognize the discrepancies that exist in terms of wealth and income in our society and take that into account in whatever decisions we're making.
Thanks, Mark. And to address you, oh, hold on, sorry. Getting some weird feedback. Oh, sorry, that was on my side. To address one of your questions about how these other states are raising revenue. Yeah, as I mentioned, California, that's almost exclusively coming from their Cap and Invest program. New York issued a $4.2 billion bond. I don't know if that's a general obligation bond, repaid through their tax base, or if it's a revenue bond paid elsewhere. So we could look into that. And Minnesota, I'm not sure, but a good point, and we can try to come back to you on their revenue generating activities to generate that $2 billion. And let's see. Dunn, are you back on with a working mic? Maybe not. Okay. So sorry, Don, if you're able to hear us, unfortunately, we're still not able to hear you. So do let us know if you get your mic working. All right. Well, was there any other further conversation you wanted to have on the funding piece?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
there anyone else?
Sorry, can I just a couple of words to augment what the secretary and the director were saying? I think you guys are right that the demands are enormous, and I think we need to find a way to leverage private capital to come alongside the state's resources, the state and the county resources that will be available. And I do think there are some very attractive ways to do that. Clearly, particularly on the building side, for state-owned, county-owned, city-owned buildings, these are all rated entities. I think private capital could be organized to come alongside and help with some solutions for new builds and for reconstruction. I think one of the biggest challenges will be on the smaller building side, where we've got a bunch of unrated credits, and state might be able to provide some assistance or guarantees on a big capital that would allow private capital to come in and participate. So that would be a way of leveraging very few dollars from the state, but get a lot of impact, I think.
Okay, so thank you for that. What I'd like to do is, well, first ask you a question. Can we, I'd like to see where the interest is in terms of maybe voting on whether we should decide on, should we include funding mechanisms or ideas into the recommendations or not? Because I'm not here, I don't know if that's of interest, or do you all feel that we can just push the recommendations forward and let the state figure out how we're going to fund probably 1 billion plus of incentives? So is that something we can do, a vote on that, just to see where people?
This
Yes.
is Kathy Magruder with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, and I'm sorry I have laryngitis today. So I sound
no.
a little bit like Kermit the Frog here. I want to thank you and Director Pinsky for the work that you're doing to look at this question. And I would support the inclusion of including funding and financing recommendations in the task force report. I think Dunn makes a great point about leveraging private capital. I know you all know how important that is, and the center's role in trying to help facilitate that. And there are a number of different things that can be included in the funding and financing piece of this. I'm happy to continue working with your staff on honing those recommendations to be something comprehensive. And we really do feel that it's one thing to identify the problem. It's completely another to bring the solution to the table. So we want to be
Right.
part of helping you bring the solution.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. So maybe even if we don't like today, we're not going to probably know which one of the 7 plus the other ones that were mentioned. We don't have time to get into which one is the best one and but what we could do is put in the report that, we need to look into these mechanisms, right? Some kind of funding mechanism. Maybe we can pick a couple of these, maybe not, and say, we recommend that in order to fund everything that we're saying, the state should take a critical look at programs where we're not relying on taxpayers totally to fund this transition that we're talking about in this task force. How does that sound? Any comments on that?
We have a hand up from Charisse online.
Yeah, hi. Sorry I'm not with you guys today, but the schedule took over. But nonetheless, getting to your question about whether or not we should include funding, I think it's just a stack of paper if we don't. So I think it's absolutely critical. I know you said you wanted to take a vote. I don't know if you're just limiting that to task force members, but I am task force member, so I would certainly think it's imperative that we include funding recommendations, and then the state can decide which ones they can and can't implement.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, let's get a pulse. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I guess my question, Madam Secretary, is how specific would you like us to be?
Yes.
No, seriously.
Yes, good point.
I mean, for example,
Okay.
to say something like, and I'm just off the top of my head, strongly consider the cap and invest, and then maybe in addition, I won't say strongly consider, number 3, the registration fees, as well as pursuing number 7. Now, I agree with you. I don't think that's going to get resolved for a while, and we don't know if it's a winner or not, or if it goes to Supreme Court. But I think we should support it.
Yes.
Philosophically, I agree with it. I don't want to bet the house on it.
Right.
But I think having a position that we support those efforts is fine. So, now I would like to amend it that even on number 1, that we do it in a way that burden is not borne by working families, or that is, back to my earlier comment, that it is done in as progressive a fashion as possible. But I don't want to get too specific or nuanced that we're going to get brickbats from all over the place. So that's why I'm not sure how specific to make it.
Maybe we could start this vote by saying we agree that I had it in my head when you were speaking. It's kind of left. So what I was thinking is we could vote in favor of, we're recommending in the report that strong consideration should be placed on the following funding ideas to generate funds for Maryland to fund this green transition. So maybe what we could do is look at what we have in front of us. Maybe the first course is, do you want to add anything else on here? And then we go through a quick vote to see which ones we should consider putting into the report that, someone needs to look further into. Looking at those funding sources as the funding source to fund what we're asking. Yes.
I think maybe one thing in addition to looking for additional funding is also taking a look at existing funding and how it is used across the state. And maybe that is something that DBM could help with to kind of analyze, what funding typically is left unspent, or is there any additional funding that is currently used for something that is counter acting to, climate goals that could potentially be repurposed.
Okay. Well, how would we write that? That's good. I get that. That's a good idea, actually.
I mean, that aligns with, I think one of the recommendations in terms of, unless I'm just mixing this up with the recommendation that we just approved at the Climate Commission, but about redirecting state fund. If we have state funds that are going toward,
Yep.
Fossil fuel infrastructure projects or other projects that don't align with the state's climate priorities, that those funds be redirected toward cleaner sources. And I know that we heard some great progress from MEA in terms of some of those adjustments they've already made on those fronts.
Okay. So I think we should, again, if we don't vote, I'm asking you all to think about it, really think about what we're about to do, because if we submit this report without any recommendations for funding, we're just submitting, in my opinion, and as the opinion of so many others who have spoken, you're just submitting a report with no solutions. So I'd say let's really think critically and see if we can at least put in the report that we need to look at these types of funding ideas.
And we got a hand up from Mark Sivitz online.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I just wanted to get clarity on what we may be voting on. I think I like several others who've spoken, I fully support including in the report some kind of recommendations for funding. But I'm a proxy on this call for David Lapp, the People's Council. I'm not prepared today to vote on any particular funding mechanisms pending further discussion. So I think, I don't know what the appropriate process is here, but I'm fully prepared to vote for moving forward a discussion on including funding mechanisms, but not on particulars right now.
Any ideas before we get started with a vote? Any ideas how we can make this efficient? Just a general statement maybe, or
Or it can be,
some of these?
or it can be specific, and the OPC can sit this one out and we can revisit it for a formal vote on November 9th or whatever. That's another option.
That is, yeah.
I don't know.
Secretary McElwain, and again, this is Kathy Magruder. I have some very specific funding and financing strategies that I would like to include in the recommendation on financing, in addition to the sources, some uses. And I would be happy to, I'm sorry that you don't have that in front of you today, but I would like to include those. So if we could just park this and look at that comprehensively again on the 9th, I think that would be helpful. And happy.
Thank you. That's right in line with what we were just saying. All right, so we will park this. Again, please think about funding opportunities. Be ready to talk about it on November 9th. And maybe at that time, we can hopefully have enough information to make a vote.
Sorry, one quick edit, November 7th.
7th, not the 9th, the 7th. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so,
Before we leave,
yes.
having been in the legislature, the more nebulous it is, I think people will see it as less serious. And also the less targeted, they will start finding their own targets
Sure.
of where to take it from. And being involved with one fund, I'm guessing it will be at the front of the line for them to target, to cannibalize some of the revenue that we receive. So
Which is not even enough.
not anywhere close.
No.
So without getting into nuance where it creates lots of enemies, I just think we should consider the context when we come back and visit this in November 7th.
Okay, so these are the areas that I want people to think about and then obviously bring their own ideas. How do you want to close that?
Okay,
Renee?
so then the staff can work on developing, drafting a discussion draft recommendation on this front. We also welcome input. It sounds like Kathy, thanks in advance for the ideas that sounded like you wanted to send forward to us. Similar, I think, to how we handled this after the last meeting, why don't we take the next several days to send the staff here, specifically Cindy, to collect your ideas on how to phrase this funding recommendation from the task force, and then we'll bring a discussion draft to you for the next meeting.
Can I make a suggestion? Give folks a date when you want Cindy to be inundated by emails.
I don't ever want Cindy to be in emails, but let's see
Give people a deadline.
yeah, if November 7th is the meeting, then that is, why don't we say November 1st? Next Wednesday, November 1st. That gives us about a week. And that'll be almost a week before the meeting of November 7th. And it lets you still chew on these ideas while trick and treating.
That's rich.
All right, thank you.
So you're suggesting we go around with the bucket and say, please donate to the.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
yeah, put the bottom out, see what we collect, and that will be our building incentives for next year. So we're gonna transition to in a second to really revisiting your priority recommendations. We have a guest here to talk about one of the concepts specifically that we started to scratch on last time, but didn't quite go far enough. But I also, before we turn to that conversation, wanted to invite Julia Weigel from AECOM back, because AECOM sharpened the pencil and revisited some of their calculus on one of their bits of analysis for us. Basically, what would it cost if the state were to continue to fund and offer the currently federally funded or soon to be federally funded here is the home electrification appliance rebate, if I'm remembering the HERE acronym correctly. So what we know is that states are setting up this rebate program. There was just a question that we put to AECOM. Once that federal funding runs out, what would it cost the state if the state wanted to continue offering those same rebates to low, moderate, and middle income households? Julia, can I turn it to you to provide a quick update on the new math on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to quickly share my screen as long as that all goes smoothly. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep, just came up.
Okay, great. I'm not going to fully open it because I'll just be brief and that will take me more time. So our analysis last week of extending the home electrification and appliance rebate program for Maryland extended that cost out to apply to all low-income buildings and 50% of middle-income residential homes, which is how the current IRA HEAR program is set up. So that cost came out to $14.23 billion and roughly $711 million per year. So that was considering that cost extended out to cover all of those residential homes, as considering it to be the only support for home electrification and heat pump installation. What we did for this next iteration was to consider potential other funding sources that could support that heat pump installation and ideally reduce that total gap in incremental cost that needs to either have some sort of support or be approached in a different way. And Through that analysis, it actually reduced the total cost gap a good amount to 8.51 billion and an annual value of around 411 million per year. So what went into that was taking into account the IRA tax credits, which for Maryland are going to be about 809 million total. And it also includes the Maryland Low to Moderate Income Energy Efficiency Grant that is for $16.5 million, with the assumption that that value continues every year. The last piece of this, which is an assumption we had to make, but also ties into some of the Empower related conversations the task force has been having, is that we took the total value of Empower funding as it is right now, which is 136.9 million, and we allocated that fully to electrification. So the full value right now, only a small percentage of Empower is going to support that electrification work. So we took the whole value and applied it to reduce that cost, to look at this, considering the direction that Maryland is going and based on the conversations we've been having here about reallocating some Empower funding. So I would say that's the greatest assumption that was made, but it also leads to a very interesting conversation about reallocating Empower funds. Overall, the takeaway here is that there are other funding sources that are going to support heat pump installation that significantly reduces the expected gap in incremental cost to transition residential homes to heat pumps.
Thank you, Julia. And just for everyone's awareness, one of the ways that we've tried to sort of frame up some of the analysis that AECOM has provided is toward the end of the list of your draft recommendations. We've included a draft recommendation for funding electrification projects for low to moderate income households. So that's kind of a placeholder for some of the work that AECOM has been doing. We got a couple of questions as you were going here, Julia, and one from Chris Sticks. How are you differentiating between incentives for rental building owners from homeowners, which actually might be more of a programmatic question that, you know, MEA is digging into the federal guidance on this program. And I know that part of the intent of the program is that the program is accessible to both homeowners and to landlords to make these improvements in rental units. I don't know if there's enough known about the programmatic details to know exactly how to answer your question, Chris, but that is the intent of the federal program is that it will be for the benefit of both low to moderate income homeowners and renters. And Kathy asked, how does the analysis include single and multifamily households? Yeah, based on what I just said, it would be inclusive of multifamily. Unless Julie, is there anything you want to say in addition to that one?
It is based on income and based on available incentives. So some multifamily homes will be included, but it is a high level analysis. For Kathy's question, the total Empower funds right now are 136.9 million. Those are total funds for the program. Right now, this amount that goes towards electrification specifically is significantly smaller. So this analysis considered applying all of those funds towards electrification.
So for the purposes of this task force, aren't we focused on buildings that exceed 30,000 square feet? And so financing for any measures here for this task force are going to be related to multifamily properties that exceed 30,000 square feet. Is that a bad assumption?
If you want to answer, Mark.
Kathy, this is Paul Pinsky.
Yep.
No, this is not limited to the 35,000 square feet and larger buildings enunciated in the Climate Solutions Now Act. This is generic. We are addressing the whole issue And I think we know and we will learn in the next 6 weeks of how there's going to be decarbonization in the whole building sector beyond those large buildings. So we are not limited. We are not simply addressing those covered in CSNA, which require, as you know, a 20% greenhouse gas reduction.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks, Julia, for that update. I'm going to turn now to Cliff to start us down the road of revisiting our priority recommendations, and then to turn things to our guest to dive into one of them in particular.
So are you suggesting that we should go through some of the others until we get to the inclusive utility investment, or do you want to start off with David going through IUI?
Yeah, I was imagining we would maybe start with that one since we have a guest here for that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Cliff Majerzik with the Institute for Market Transformation. Thank you all for being here. I will be facilitating the portion of the conversation where we try and dig down and finalize on the priority recommendations. And one of those recommendations that has come through so far, and that you received in the document that Cindy emailed out yesterday, is on-bill financing, which two flavors were recommended. One was third-party on-bill repayment, and the other was inclusive utility investment. And the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, actually coined the term inclusive utility investment. It was a pre-existing concept. Previously, it was sometimes known as on-bill tariff financing. We're lucky to have with us an expert, David Tansabell from the U.S. EPA, who actually formerly worked for the Maryland state government, who can share with us a little bit more color on exactly what inclusive utility investment is, so that we can have a more educated conversation about that in our recommendations. So with that, I'll hand it off to David.
Great, thank you. Yes, great to be here. David Tansabell. I'm a senior utility policy analyst with the EPA's State and Local Climate and Energy Branch. Thank you for the invitation to come up here. It's good to see some familiar faces and names, a few online, and be back in this building. It's been a few years since my days at PPRP, but it's nice to be back. Great, yeah, so inclusive utility investment, tariffed on-bill or on-bill tariff programs. It is a mouthful, but IUI is a lot of how we refer to it now at EPA. Sorry, okay, yeah.
I can advance for you.
So again, I'm really quick. I'm with the State and Local Climate and Energy Branch. This is what we do. We are a resource for state and local governments, so please use us. This is an example of some of the inventory analysis and policy resources we provide. But if there is any data analysis that you need that you don't have, you can come ask us for it and we can try and provide it. So that's what we do. So please, it's great to be here and be utilized by our state. So next. So here's a few things I'll cover. So there's a lot of terms, again, on-bill financing, on-bill loan or on-bill repayment, inclusive utility investment. And then I'll talk about some consumer protection and then provide some resources beyond what we can provide. But we are happy to be a resource as needed. So on-bill financing. So the utility will be financing this program. I just want to make sure we're clear on the terms here, because a lot of people throw a lot of these terms around. So the utility is financing it. It is essentially a loan from the utility. It's paid back over time by the savings created from that upgrade. So there's a liability that's created when you take that loan from the utility, and that liability stays with the account holder. It's non-transferable. So because it's non-transferable, renters are excluded from this type of program, which makes it hard for multifamily, obviously. And it also adds debt to that account holder. So it is a liability that they carry with default risk and risk to their credit rating and down the road, and if they have an inability to pay. Oftentimes, though, you'll see on-bill financing just used as an umbrella term for anything that has to do with using the utility bill to pay back for a upgrade. So just want to make sure that distinction's out there. And then on-bill loan or repayment, usually this is through a third party, and then utilizing the utility for the on-bill repayment. The utility is also sometimes involved in credit enhancements to get better terms. So using some ratepayer funding to enhance the credit of the customer. Now, these on-bill financing programs also often require some sort of credit check, credit history, again, excluding a lot of participants that would want to participate in these programs.
A question. David, Mark Case, I work for BGE, so a utility company. Under this model, how does the utility avoid sort of being subject to all the banking and credit regulations, or they're not able to avoid that? That's just part of the package.
Well, it's considered it's not technically a loan. It's considered an investment by the utility, even though the customer creates a liability. My understanding is that they are avoiding the banking regulations through that, since it's gone through approved.
I mean, we have looked at it extensively
Okay.
with legal counsel. We're updating that since, it was done at the commission about 8 years ago. I've got the filings from 2015, but I would say that's the concern that's come up as we've looked at it, is that it would be very difficult to avoid those banking regulations.
As David can show you on, I don't know if you have a slide, but there are quite a few utilities that have already done this. This is not uncharted territory. And I believe that they have charted ways for inclusive utility investment to be not subject to banking regulations.
Yeah, so those are the on-bill programs, and now I'm going to get kind of the focus of this. I just wanted to lay out, just so we have the right terms here before we get to the inclusive utility investment.
Director Pinsky.
Yeah, I'm sorry, two quick questions. Is it a floating interest rate? I guess I'm curious to know what the interest rate will be. That's number one. Number two, can they also go to the PSC asking for a service fee for even providing this service? And is that at 9.6% or what?
The actual rates, I'm not sure of. I have one or two examples. I have a lot of examples in the resources. If you want to dig in and get that answer. I mean, every program is different.
At a macro, who sets it? And is there a ballpark we're talking about in terms, they're loaning money, obviously, even though we cover it so they can avoid the banking regulation. I get that. I'm just curious to know 30,000 feet, what to expect and who's setting that, and whether that's separate and in addition to any service return they request in front of PSC as they do on other services they provide.
So because an IUI, inclusive utility investment, is an approved tariff from the PSC is approving all the terms of that tariff. They're approving the rate, they're approving all the cost recovery terms. So that is all submitted to the PSC. The PSC approves it. So the PSC is a critical piece in ensuring consumer protection and approving all the rates and cost recovery.
Got it.
So
that answers it.
Great.
Thanks.
And as you can see on this slide, the IUI is a site-specific tariff instead of a customer-specific tariff. So that again, it's a cost recovery that's less than the estimated savings, but the liability is associated with the meter. It is associated with the location. So that way it is transferable to a new tenant, which allows renters to be eligible for this program. And again, PSC involvement, they are a critical piece here in stakeholder engagement in deciding how the tariff will be approved. And then there are opportunities for state involvement, whether that's some programs use public funds to capitalize, some private, some a combination. Some use private capital and public funds to make it more attractive for the private investment. There is a lot of thought that these programs are attractive to private capital, because what is the last thing when a low-income customer has a lot of bills, one of the last things they will stop paying is the utility bill. So it is considered a much safer investment than a lot of other low-income projects that are going to low-income customers. So, so again, this slide, I guess the donut hole is kind of the what IUI was intended to fill. There was a gap in services, whether if you're very low income, there are services and programs for you. You don't need any for the credit worthy, but the middle is what this is intended to fill. You go to the next slide.
Can I just ask, because I'm just trying to wrap my own head around it. So the idea is for low income, we have presumably or hopefully sufficient government funded support for that population. And then you've got another piece of the population that is able to secure its own financing, higher income, maybe middle and upper class. So is it, roughly speaking, kind of moderate income households that fall in that gap where IUI is seen as an important and targeted mechanism for moderate income?
To the low end of the moderate, and then low income as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of jumped ahead in answering the question here, but again, it's a finance through a utility offer that pays for the upgrade on a site-specific tariff. And again, that tariff is going to be approved through the PSC. So the PSC has a lot of a large role in this. Again, it's transferable, which allows renters to be eligible. 100% of the upfront costs can be taken care of through this. So, yeah. So, and you know, the liability, it really does address the split incentive between the landlords and tenants. Next slide. This slide just kind of summarizes it. So 0 upfront costs, no debt. The tariffs describe the terms. This is not a loan. It's transferable to renters, accessible to all customers. So some on-bill programs, again, need credit check or credit worthiness. A lot of programs have no requirements. Some have required a bill history of paying your bill, but a lot have 0 requirements at all. You just have to be a utility customer. And then some allow for renewable energy, actually, as long as the end state is an ownership path at the end of the payback. And again, you know, potential for better financing terms from the private sector due to the fact that utility bills are seen as the last thing people will stop paying.
I could ask a quick question. Louisa Ritchie with Baltimore County Government and the task force. Is there a requirement for the maximum payback terms or maximum loan terms on these?
Again, this consumer protection, and actually go to the next slide, you know, again, that's decided by the PSC and the approval of the tariff, the rate. So cost effectiveness screening. So that ensures bill neutrality, and it's a key piece. And it's actually a requirement for some programs that the assessment is that this will be that you have to show that the upgrade will create savings and there will be payment on that upgrade from those savings. So, so again, yeah, some of the other consumer protections, disconnections have been something that have been an issue. Repossession prohibitions if failure to pay. But again, these are just examples of some of the consumer protections that have been used, but all set by Public Service Commission. Some have been set by enabling legislation when that has been utilized. And actually in the resources, I do provide one of the consumer protection assessment papers. So So a couple examples. Sorry, I included so much on here. I really shouldn't have. Now I'm looking at it. But if you look at the first one, so as you can see, this pay as you save. That is a intellectual property. That is this prescriptive program that a lot of utilities have used. There are very specific terms to those programs, but it is a known entity. It works. There's consumer protections mandatory and built into that program. So that is what that is if you see that. But just the last bullet on the first example just shows some of the outcomes and results from the program. And then I think important in the second, in the Amarine, Missouri. So here they did approve a higher rate of return on the investment from the utility, but then the utility was required to reduce the interest that was charged and how much they're recouping from the actual customer. So shifting the cost away from the low-income customer that's getting access to this program to the larger rate base by giving them a higher rate of return. And that's just an example. I think that was from 2 or 3 years ago. And then the last Midwest Energy Cooperative, just to note that they collaborate with the Kansas Weatherization Assistance Program. Sometimes there are upgrades that don't meet the Weatherization Assistance Program threshold, and they were able to use IUI to do all those upgrades at the same time. So they work in coordination with that program. So those are just a few examples. And then there are a lot of different resources on IUI. So I work with our folks at the Energy Star branches. They offer technical assistance. We can help. On the first 2 links, there's probably about 30 different examples you can look at of links to the different specific utilities or municipalities that are co-ops that are running these programs. And then NRRI, that's really focused for the PSC. It's generally non-bill assessment, and then there's some consumer protection on. Just wanted to make sure these resources were available if you needed them. But we are happy to help if you have any further questions. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Anyone have any questions for David about IUI?
A hand up from Kathy Magruder.
I do. Hi, thank you. I'm wondering about caps on the amount of loans that are available and the useful life of the equipment that's required in association with these programs, and if there are service fees that utilities are allowed to charge for the servicing of the lending beyond the normal rate for the power that they're serving.
So some of the programs that have been set up targeting specific upgrades, specific technologies, specific customer sectors. So it really depends on the program you're setting up, what the upgrades are that will be allowed. But again, there have been consumer protections around warranties, and also consumer protections around that. If the savings do not show up, that and the customer has given a good faith effort to get them installed, that they will not be that essentially their bill goes back to as if they didn't get the upgrade, and the utility will have to take that loss. I have heard of fees being allowed. I couldn't speak exactly what they were, but I know that that has happened. So
there's and caps on the amount of the investment, you're not clear yet.
I'm not sure. I know some programs have capped the amount of years they are allowed to recoup. So capping it at 10 years, and so they need to be able to recoup their investment in 10 years, or they're done recouping. And then the full savings is passed to the customer after that period. So there are limits such as those.
Thank you, David. I would just like to comment that, like Mr. Case, we've looked at this financing model for Maryland and have some concerns about the cost of capital that the utilities, you're essentially, we're asking them to invest their own profit for this purpose and to become lenders, and to monitor and maintain equipment. That there has to be some verification that the savings are provided. So all of that cost becomes part of the rate base that then is borne by a spread of consumers across the territory, right? It's not just okay, all of this cost gets borne by those that are borrowing the money to do the improvements. The idea of utilities becoming banks, I know, is something that the lending community in the state has a concern about based on our work in this space. And there are certain programs that have obviously had success in achieving outcomes, but based on our experience with Empower and the use of utility funds to front load Empower and the debt that is now racked up that is owed to the utilities for the use of their funds to run the Empower programs, I have a real concern about going down that path again with an additional debt structure, and just want to raise that as a concern when there is so much already happening in the private sector with lending partnered with green banks, partnered with not-for-profit entities to sort of address this need. The programs that are being run by DHCD are serving a very important targeted audience, and the resources are available through DHCD to do a lot of the types of improvements that would be made using this on-bill structure. So that it's kind of duplicative of what's out there. I'm not sure that this is more advantageous than what we're already putting in place in Maryland.
Yeah, this is Mark Case again. I agree with 99% of what you just said. I know this has been looked at extensively under Empower. There was a financing work group report just came out 3 months ago in July through Empower, talking about the pilot program that was done. One of the Maryland utilities included in its August 1 filing for 24 to 26, a private financing program, similar to one they have in Delaware. I'm not seeing the value of utility financing versus private financing, and not calling this a loan, but it's sort of an investment. I know before that's been looked at, and the feeling was it would not withstand a challenge.
I was just going to say that there are programs that Kathy, I don't know if you were saying that the funding was all public funding or ratepayer funding, because there are programs that utilize private funding and just use a small portion for either a credit enhancement or a loan loss reserve. Again, I'm making no judgment call on the qualification of the utility turning into a bank, but the utilizing funds just for a loan loss reserve or a credit enhancement to then get the private capitalization of the program.
There are different ways that this could be implemented. I understand that, and that braiding it with public money to reduce the cost of capital or to provide loss guarantees is one way that it can, public investment can make a difference. But I just think that when you look at the cost of utilities running anything, and, all due respect to Mark Case and our utility partners, this is a big animal with expensive you know, personnel, and everything is done with, you know, a bigger budget. And I'm not sure that this is the most efficient use of public money if you're going to put it toward an on-bill strategy. And then if you're asking the utilities to finance it using their own capital, it has to come out of the, you know, the rate that we're paying. That's where they get their money. So unless you're going to give them a source of capital to lend at a no cost rate to begin with, they're going to want to look at what is that cost of capital on the market to them to begin with.
So I'm hearing some opposition to the specific concept of inclusive utility investments, including that in the priority recommendations. You all can see the priority recommendations on the screen now. One possibility would be to remove the sentence that references inclusive utility investment, to leave the more general concept of on-bill repayment options to finance energy efficiency and electrification projects. How would you feel about simply removing that sentence so that there's no specific call out of either inclusive utility investment or third-party financiers? Is there anybody that would you know, object to that as a way to sort of remove this controversial aspect from the priority recommendations?
OPC would object to that. I think, you know, the recommendation as it's phrased right now simply says investigate options. So it doesn't definitively, you know, endorse anything. I think their concerns have been raised. I mean, one of the interesting things about IUI, which I don't pretend to have a great understanding of, is that it seems to provide more options for renters than some of the options that are on the table right now. And I don't know if, I don't want to put Nicole on the spot, but if DHCD could comment on the extent to which its current programs are effective at reaching renters. My understanding is there are a lot of renters who are, you know, are in need of services that are not being totally served by existing programs. So we would support keeping this in. If for no other reason, then it simply says investigate options. And I think this is something we shouldn't foreclose at this point.
Okay.
Sure. This is Nicolette Tran, DHCD. In general, I think we have seen this in some of the other draft recommendations. So this might be a question that we want to answer more broadly of how specific we want to include examples of what can be done, or whether we want to leave the implementation options completely open and focus on just setting targets and endpoints or parameters of where this is supposed to go. I think this is one of these examples where we can be very specific if this is a way to do it. Do we want to add that as an example, or want we just leave it open?
Similar to the funding discussion.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that we should strike that second sentence and leave it more open?
I'm suggesting that is for the group to decide. We have run into, and I can just speak for the limited interest group, run into that we were getting very helpful and very detailed implementation of how the goals can be accomplished, but there are a lot more out there, and the implementation may be more of a secondary step, versus here setting the parameters of where we need to be. And then, you know, how exactly we get there, that's a whole nother conversation with a lot more options than we can even discuss in this setting.
Can I just ask Mark from OPC? Mark, you commented that there were a lot of renters that apparently need assistance. I know you were asking Nicoletta to determine or to respond to a question about how their programs do or don't assist renters. Do you have any definitive data on the volume of renters that are not being, where the needs not being addressed, or is that anecdotal?
Well, no, not at hand. And to be clear, it wasn't a statement. It was sort of more an assumption. And that's why I posed it to DHCD as a question. But, you know, the split incentive is a well-known problem with efficiency programs as between building owners and building occupants. So it was my assumption that there are a lot of renters who are in need of additional programmatic assistance, but I don't have data.
Thank you.
Nicola Tran, DHCD again, and to speak that a little bit more, the split incentive does exist. It does make it harder to bring solutions to renters, specifically the renters that live in small buildings or individual rentals. For multifamily properties, it is not as big of a problem. It is that in between small rentals and individual rentals that are harder to reach. To follow up on that IUI solution, how does that program address landlord buy-in? So it did say that the renters can sign up for it and participate, but for making improvements to building structure that is not owned by them, I would assume that there's still landlord buy-in required, right? Okay, so it wouldn't eliminate that entirely either.
It doesn't eliminate it. I know there are some programs that have not gone away with it, but they've essentially, the tenant is allowed to get to a certain step before the landlord is allowed to make a decision. So they can actually that way the landlord actually has to see what the tenant was planning before they can make their veto.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Let's go really quickly to a couple of hands that are up, and then we might just need to call the question on whether or not to include the sentence in question on this one. Ben, do you want to go ahead quickly?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about consumer protection a little more. You said there are a bunch of different ways to get that done, but so like in residential programs in other states, think like PACE Residential, that's similar. It goes with the property. There were some really bad actors that shut those programs down. How do you prevent that here? How do you see consumer protection going that works well in that market?
Well, again, this isn't to the property; it's to the meter. So it's your property. But anyway, so that is a distinction. But some programs require like the PAYS model, require cost effectiveness testing and proving that the upgrade will provide savings and that savings can pay back that upgrade. There are warranties on the upgrades, release of payment obligation if the upgrade is a failure by no fault of the customer. Again, disconnection, customer protections. The PSC has generally been the one that has ensured consumer protections are in place. There has been some states that have done legislation directing the PSC to create an IUI program, and within that enabling legislation, there was some consumer protections built in. But it really does require the PSC, who is approving that tariff, that charge on the utility bill, to ensure that those protections are there.
Thanks, David. Let's go to Joshua briefly.
Yes. Hello, Mark. Thank you. Joshua Galloway with New Ecology and Task Force member. I'd like to include the IUI statement in the paragraph, if only to show a concrete example that would support the recommendation being given. Again, I agree with the Office of People's Counsel that it's not saying we're going to do this, but I think it's helpful to give a concrete solution when presenting an idea. Thank you.
Okay, well, we clearly have differing opinions on this point. I think we're going to call a vote to settle it so that we can move on. So I think if we could ask for the folks in the room to hold up your hand. And I would remind folks, only task force members can cast votes. So if you're not a task force member, don't try to vote. Now,
What's the motion to include or remove?
The motion, I would propose, I'm not a member, but I propose just for clarity that the motion be to strike the second sentence, the sentence that reads, options include inclusive utility investment where the utility finances projects at a reasonably low rate of return and the repayment obligation attaches to the location's utility meter and or third-party financing where the utility bill includes a pass-through repayment to a third-party financier. So the broad concept would remain in the first sentence, but the question that we're putting to a vote is whether to strike this sentence, second sentence. Does that sound an appropriate vote? So if you're voting yes, you're voting to strike the sentence. If you're voting no, you're voting to keep the sentence. How do we want to handle people, task force members online voting?
If they would use the raise hand feature, then we can get an easy tally of the hands up.
So if you
Do a roll.
are voting yes as a task force member,
Roll call or no?
I'd rather not take the time. Yeah.
if you're voting yes as a task force member, please raise your hand.
To remove.
Yes, to remove.
Yes to remove the sentence. So in the room. Okay. All right. Whenever, who is recording the votes? Just let us know when you've recorded, and then we can ask everyone to lower their hand.
I counted 5 in the room and 6 online.
Okay. All right, everyone online, please lower your hand. There's one hand still up. All right, we'll just note that maybe doesn't count. All right, now if you would like online, if you're a task force member and you'd like to vote no, that you want to keep the sentence, please raise your hand. Okay. It looks like the yeses have it. So we will be striking this sentence from the policy recommendations. I think the exact vote tally, do you have the exact tally, Mark?
I think that was 11 in favor and 5 opposed.
Okay. All right, thank you. We will move on. I appreciate everyone being very respectful and observing the process. So I'm going to try to delete this sentence if I can. All right. Okay, so I don't think there have been some additions here. I think we can probably keep them. Ensure all financing programs are accompanied by robust consumer protections. Any new financing should be made available to support should not be made available to support new fossil fuel based equipment. And the state should educate market actors to socialize innovative financing options. For example, energy as a service, low interest loans, incentives, and to address barriers. For example, lender consent for CPACE, commercial properties of clean energy. So if anybody has any concerns about this, speak now, otherwise we will move on. Okay, hearing no concerns, that stays. So I'm not going to highlight anything that hasn't changed. If anybody has any concerns, please raise them, but hopefully we're all good with that. On the workforce development, this is a suggestion that came from Ashita Gona at Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, just to add some additional color as to what sort of skills are going to be trained, as to provide some specific examples: electric upgrades, installing heat pumps, induction stoves, and other highly efficient electric technologies. Again, if you have any concerns about that, speak up. You can raise your hand if you're online. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay. With some additional details related to grow the clean energy transition hub. So the dollar figure has not changed. Some suggested additions are to add in engaging in ongoing partnerships with community groups as a basically just to, I think that was previously in there, but we're grouping it together to make it to group it with collaborate with the community and build trust. And develop market-based and market-savvy programs and resources, including case studies. That was a recommendation that we got, including from McGran. All right, no concerns. Moving on. The one-stop shop to support limited income housing. Now, there's a dollar figure here. Nicola and I have had a sort of sidebar, And if it's okay with this task force, and I'll let Nicola speak to this in a moment, we would suggest removing the dollar figure for now and give Nicola a chance. It may take her a week or two to get a dollar figure that she thinks is appropriate based on DHCD's best estimates. Are folks comfortable with leaving, putting a blank there instead of 1 million for now, and giving DHCD a little while to come up with a cost estimate instead? All right, I see some nodding heads. All right.
At least 1 million.
I will strike the 1 million for now, and it's just going to be a blank for now, and Nicola will use her best efforts to fill in a blank. And obviously, this task force will have to vote on any number that goes in there, but this is, rather than voting now on a number, or approving now a number, we're going to give her some time to come back. Yes, please.
For clarification, is this just for staffing or is this for, does it also, do they offer grants through the hub or?
So the idea is that the hub will be offering financial assistance. So obviously 1 million is almost nothing in the context of the entire limited income housing space, but there are existing programs that they can draw on. The hub would be a way to organize existing programs. And I think clearly, and you'll see, we already talked about this, there's a lot of money that we're talking about and being needed to help low-income housing add, limited income housing add heat pumps. And we're talking billions of dollars. So there's big money that will potentially be coordinated by the one-stop shop, and DHCD will look at, you know, price tags, and potentially they could come back with multiple numbers, but they'll provide detail when they do come back. This is how much we think the money should be, and this is what it will be paying, broadly speaking.
So my understanding was that this dollar figure here is mostly for the coordination of pulling it all together, and that the funding for the actual in-home work would come from program funding. I can provide, however, what the Green and Healthy Task Force has identified so far as what is needed to do the in-home work too. So we could, you know, have those at two separate dollar amounts.
Okay, that's great. And obviously, the extent that we can coordinate the work of this task force and the Green and Healthy Task Force, that's a good thing.
Yep.
Yes, please.
It's Greg Ackman from Building Trades again. And I'm not an expert on all the federal programs, but I do recall there being mention of there being some pretty significant federal funding through the greenhouse gas reduction programs for this type of work. I'm not sure if that's those applications are already in play, but obviously that's something I hope that you know, for both the revenue conversation and for, you know, the conversation about you know, how to stand up the hub, hopefully that could also be considered. And you know, I know through our council, at least experience in other jurisdictions, there are a lot of innovative ways to both promote some of the other equity priorities of this task force, you know, and also improve the state's competitiveness for that federal funding. So maybe just also, I might suggest, you know, maybe an additional bullet point is to, you know, put together recommendations for ways that the federal government could, you know, through discretionary grants, help fund some of these activities.
So in particular, there is the greenhouse gas reduction funds. The EPA has already put out a solicitation for bids. Green banks and others are seeking to get that money. They will be awarded billions of dollars. That will be subject to the Justice 40, so 40% to frontline communities. So potentially, would it make sense to add a bullet to say, sort of coordinate with and help raise awareness and direct to the greenhouse gas reduction funds lending?
Yeah, but I think potentially that would make sense. It does. I mean, and I don't know off the top of my head, but my understanding is that it covers a lot of the activities that are mentioned here, or it should, that's one of the eligible uses of the funding. I'm not.
It does. However, that funding goes directly to properties to make the upgrade, so it wouldn't be available for the central hub. But it could be coordinated, and I think that could be covered by the bullet point that we have further down here, where it says drive wide participation and facilitate easy access to programs.
Drive participation of rental properties by engaging tenants and landlords?
The one above that, just drive wide participation and facilitate access to programs, and that could be included in that.
Is that sufficient, Greg? So no addition is needed? Okay, great.
Kathy?
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My understanding is that the hub is operated through the legislation, was an MEA managed activity. I'm not quite clear that I understand the role of DHCD in this, other than technical support. Is that the wrong?
Yeah, I can see that there's some potential for confusion there. There's two separate entities that we're making priority recommendations that are proposed here. One is related to the hub, which is run by MEA. Another is a one-stop shop, which is would be run by DHCD. And the two would coordinate, and we've called out a couple places in the bullets where they would be expected to coordinate. The hub is specifically related to limited income housing. The one-stop shop is specifically for limited income housing, whereas the hub is global. It would be addressing everything, including limited income, but probably letting the one-stop shop lead in many regards with respect to limited income housing. Does that answer the question?
That provides some necessary clarity. I'm also going to ask that at the very bottom, as where you have identified financing, I think that there needs to be a bullet in relation to working with and through the Maryland Clean Energy Center and other green bank entities and the PACE program, MD PACE program to finance across the board. And I certainly will provide language to that effect, but I think it's really important that we align all three of these things: technical assistance, access to resources, and financing.
So you're referring to the broader heading of financing, building energy transition?
I'm not. I'm referring to the content that you have regarding the Clean Energy Transition Hub, that the Green Bank should be part of that tripartite relationship, that the financing piece of the puzzle be aligned with the work that the Green Bank is doing. Certainly there are other sources of capital, but the idea of braiding all of the different sources, be it private or public, is part of the focus that we are bringing here that will help enable the outcomes that are desired.
Service matchmaker.
Yeah, we do have here serve as a matchmaker
Right.
between
Yep.
building operators and capital markets. There are obviously many capital sources. That would certainly include the MCEC. But I think it would add a lot if we were to reference every possible capital source. I'm not sure is that needed for this recommendation?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that the MCEC is the matchmaker among the various sources of capital, service providers, contractors, and that is a role that should be identified in relationship to the hub.
Yeah.
Director Pinsky?
Yeah, with all due respect, Kathy, we see much of that as the role of the hub itself and the staff of the hub. That doesn't mean they will have all the expertise and technical assistance, but I'd be a little concerned of shifting all of that responsibility outside of the hub. So I think I understand the intent, but being the matchmaker of not only the financing, but matching contractors and other service providers, I think was really the intent of the role of creating the hub. Now, as everyone knows, right now it's one person who's been on board for 3 months. The suggestion is another 3 to 10 million to staff it up. We don't know if that'll get funded or not. So, but I think we got to be careful. I think we need to give it some time to sort of grow and be clear on its mission. The new staff person just sent her memo of what she thinks steps 1 and 2 and 3 should be over the next 12 to 18 months. So in terms of financing, I think that hub person will come to you or direct people to you and other green banks. I want to move a little slowly and explicitly giving off additional responsibilities.
So are you comfortable with language that points to the Green Bank as the financing source where we can stack the various public and private capital opportunities in the interest of the projects being financed?
Yeah. Look, I think we understand that MCEC exists and Montgomery County Green Bank. We know where to find you. We know you play an important role in the state. I'm a little nervous of us getting in the weeds here, that it's directing things before we need to be that explicit. That's all. And maybe it's my reservation on shifting from one role to another, but look, financing is going to be a key part of this. And that's obviously why this task force is in place in the first place. Whether it's incentives or matchmaking, private equity and leveraging the money in the MCEC. I don't know. I'm not sure what to say.
Are you, I guess the question I'm asking is, are you seeing the role of the hub being being another type of green bank entity?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
There's no fear that the hub is going to be a green bank. That is not in our plans. It was not in the one paragraph creation of this in the CSNA. And obviously, we have full support for the Montgomery Bank. So we're not going to become a banking entity. At least while I'm there, that is not our intent.
Certainly, that was the idea of matchmakers, to make clear, they're not doing lending, they're just helping connect borrowers and lenders.
So if we added a sentence that said, and where appropriate, partner with the Maryland Clean Energy Center and other green bank entities that to finance projects, that shouldn't be an issue.
No.
Cool.
Are you suggesting we add that?
Yeah.
It doesn't create heartburn.
Okay.
Yeah.
That way.
All right. So in coordination with, I'm just going to, in the interest of time, I'll just write in coordination with MCEC and other lenders. Is that okay?
Other green bank organizations.
All right. If no one objects, we'll make it so.
Thank you.
Okay. I realize that we're almost out of time. We're obviously not going to get through this entire draft in the remaining 10 minutes. But let's see how far we can go.
Let's, just as a potential time saver, we did hold time at the end of today's meeting for public comments. Is there anyone who's not a task force member who'd like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none, then I think then we can continue up till the end point with the review of the edits.
Great. Thank you very much. Nicola, do you want to speak a little bit more to the one-stop shop before we move on from that?
I think I just want to make the general comment that we have received a lot of really great and very specific recommendations from a lot of stakeholders that were included in the subgroup. And if you don't see yours specifically listed here, don't be alarmed. What we try to do is group them together into more general parameters and directions for this recommendation. And what we did include instead was to add the consultation with the Green and Healthy Task Force, which is already doing half of what is tasked already with consulting for half of what is asked here. And this task force can then be specifically looking at implementation steps to get to where this recommendation wants this one-stop shop should get.
So I hear sort of an invitation, if
Yes.
folks have something that they want to see added here, one possibility would be to work through the Green and Healthy Task Force, which will be digging down more deeply on this particular subject. There is one, Nicola and I have talked about this, is probably a little bit of wordsmithing that would happen with this one sentence here to make clear that these goals are long-term goals that will last beyond the life of the task force, the Green and Healthy Task Force. So we might do a little bit of, you might see a small tweak on that before you are asked to vote on this. anybody have any concerns rather than reading? There's a lot of new text here under the one-stop shop. There's also some deletions. Anybody have any questions or concerns about the one-stop shop additions and deletions? And as a reminder, this is specifically serving limited income housing. And it will be run by DHCD.
In coordination with Hub.
Exactly.
This is Joshua Galloway with New Ecology. Cliff, I just have a question at the top of the screen. The strikeout through providing audits, electric load analysis, kind of description of the work. Are you saying that there's room elsewhere in the process to be specific about things like that?
Yeah.
There's room through the Green and Healthy Task Force to be specific about that. And I don't think that anybody objects to those concepts. I think the intention is to keep it shorter and to be a little bit less prescriptive and to leave a little bit more to the Green and Healthy Task Force. That said, if this task force chooses to keep it in, this task force is calling the shots on this document.
And also I wanted to add, Josh, some of these very specific items like energy audits and soft costs are covered by the more broader terms for energy efficiency, comprehensive weatherization, electrification, and the other upgrades that are listed right above that part that was struck through.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. I like the fact that it starts with whole home approach, understanding that it's not just electrification, but it's weatherization, indoor air quality, all these pieces. So they understand that it's not just electrification, but whole home work.
Director Pinsky?
Yeah, just one clarification. The last bullet or new bullet near the end of bottom of the page. As we spoke about earlier, this task force is beyond BEPS. Now, again, I don't know how many buildings below 35,000 square feet we have to worry about, but if we are talking about a broader population, we should amend that to that it's not just BEPS.
And I don't think this is just BEPS. This is just one component off of this one-stop shop. It's for those buildings that do fall in that large category, we will coordinate.
Got it. Yep. And that was responsive to some comments that we got, that it was important for people to get educated about their BEPS obligations, and especially limited income housing. We need a lot of help. Any other questions or concerns related to the one-stop shop? Okay. So there's a new addition here. We've had conversation about this previously, and I'm grateful to the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative for providing this specific text that you have here. This is a new recommendation that the task force hasn't previously considered or hasn't had previous language around, even though we had conversation and it seemed like it was broadly acceptable to the task force. So Medicaid is obviously federal money, but there are certain things that Maryland can do to be able to use Medicaid funds to support housing interventions. And specifically, the new edition reads, the state shall evaluate a state Medicaid waiver plan amendment to allow Medicaid funds to support housing interventions to reduce the incidence of asthma, remove fossil fuel appliances, and install non-fossil fuel household appliances, including stoves, heat pumps, and dryers. Does anybody have any concerns or questions about this new addition? Okay, great.
How would that impact the state's costs in terms of Medicaid? It sounds like a great idea, but if I was the secretary of DH, would I be like, what?
Is anyone from Green and Healthy Homes Initiative on this call?
I know Ruth Ann was earlier.
Hi, this is Justin Berry with Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, and sorry, my camera's not turning on, but I'm here.
Justin, do you want to try and take a crack at answering Kathy's question?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So this isn't my area of expertise, but I do know it a bit. So basically, this would allow them to use some of their existing funds, which in some ways does impact their state budget, but has a pretty generous federal match. So there's Pathways Maryland is using a similar process for around some lead programs. And then recently in California, they have a similar process for asthma programs to do housing interventions. And within the Medicaid regulations, the states have the ability to use unspent funds for these types of initiatives with permission. And in short, it should not require additional state funding in the immediate, or in the long term, it's matched by the federal funding that's pretty generous for these pathways. So I'm sorry, I'm not sharp on all the specific details in pathways, but definitely there are answers to some of those questions that we can connect offline for more detail.
So the state does not currently enable this to happen now, is what we're saying.
For this specific piece here on asthma and fossil fuel appliances, that's correct. The state isn't doing that. Again, other states have used this in similar ways that show it has potential, especially on asthma. Fossil fuel would be a newer initiative.
Thank
Can I make a request, I guess, and this might be of Green and Healthy Homes. I think for the intended audience, it could be helpful to point to a specific state example. So if you know of another state that has incorporated some change at the state level to enable this, that would be helpful just to point to, I think, in the recommendation as an example.
Yeah, definitely. I believe, I forget if it was in this main group or in the low income task force, Cliff. I believe I shared at least one of the documents we had that it was like a 2-pager describing some of this. I can track that link down and share it in the chat or by email if that's helpful.
That would be great. Could you include Cindy in that email? And what we'll do is we'll include a link to that document in the minutes from this meeting. So anybody that's interested will be able to get that document. And also we'll include a link, if possible, to any other related material that Justin has that would be answering Kathy's questions. So we'll try and be transparent on that. We're pretty much out of time, but anybody else have any questions or comments? Yeah.
On that last one,
Mhm.
let's just be clear. If another state is doing it, which of those items they do? In other words, you could be reaching a little far. I mean, I understand the stoves, there's been a link, and I think at least one state has done that. I don't know about heat pumps using Medicaid money. So clear we are as to which of these operations they funded.
Justin, can you take that on as an action item that you'll try to provide the detail that Director Pinsky is requesting?
Sorry, yeah. Yes, I'll, can you repeat that just one more time to make sure I've got it? I was pulling that document and listening, but I want to make sure I
The
get it right.
document mentions 4 or 5 things. Stoves, dryers, heat pumps. And I'd be curious to know, I don't want to link to a document that says, yes, they're doing something. I'd sort of like to know what they're doing. Look, I have no qualms with pushing the envelope, but I want to know how big a reach it is in terms of what's been funded elsewhere. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate your working on that, and I really appreciate your providing this great content. All right, I'm going to call it. We're pretty much at time, and I don't want to be respectful of this time. We will continue going through the documents at our next meeting, but also in the interim, if people do have, we're not really looking for additions at this point. If you have objections, we want to hear about it, and or minor modifications, absolutely want to hear about that.
Just send it out by email.
Send it by email. That would be great.
By when, deadline?
I think, should we go with November 1st again?
November 1st sounds great. Yeah.
So by November 1st to Cindy, please. And you're welcome to send it to me as well if you'd like.
That's what, 5 days away?
Yep.
Yep.
And so, yeah, we'll meet again November 7th. That should be our final wordsmithing session. And then there's a final meeting on November 28th where you all vote in favor of our final recommendations and report.
So that's going to be a short meeting, right?
That's going to be a short one because our deadline to submit this is December 1st. So that gives us just about a day to do all of the required copying and whatnot to submit it to the Governor and General Assembly.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I realize this is a long meeting. I think we've made good progress.
Thank
Long
you.
meeting, but we always run out of time. Thank you.
Not the technical difficulties we had that